the broad category of information and news is really taking it on the chin, really, really taking it on the chin. And so, from our perspective, when we work with news publishers or information publishers, and they have content that, may have a keyword, it may just have a keyword that's potentially brand unsafe, whatever that keyword might be. You see a whole massive swath of advertisers blocked from that, and the yield really decline. And so that starts to editorially influence, right? The publishers, the supply, and so on and so forth. And you start to see movements in that direction. From my vantage point, the contextual nature is a wonderful thing because you have more refinement contextually. You understand better what is the nuance. You can read the code and the words on the page, and you can understand that this isn't just a one particular topic that's banned, should just be banned, blocked from everything, right? There's a lot of nuance here, and you can refine that nuance. But I think the broader mass tech systems today that choose to block content for advertisers are really large whack-a-mole hammers.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the e-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. Super excited to be catching up with Bob Regular, who is the CEO of Infolinks Media. And given the fact that we've both been in the digital marketing space for a long time, let's actually start with your sort of elevator pitch of Infolinks at this point in time. And that way people understand where you fit from the publisher's perspective, where you fit from the advertiser's perspective.
Sure. So Infolinks Media is actually a company that's been around in the digital media industry for quite a while. We started originally in 2007. I wasn't a part of the foundation and forming of the company. I came into the company, acquiring the company in 2018. I sort of came in, starting in the industry in the late 90s and starting multiple companies and bringing them to exit events. And I had gone out for a little while and came back in 2018 because, I really had thought that I was done with digital media, ad tech, had been quite fatigued from it for many years and working on it, and had gone out basically for a year and terribly missed it. I actually really enjoy the space. I love how dynamic it is and how much it changes. And so I came back sort of with the cliched vision of something specific I wanted to do, right? And thought that was really in need in the industry. And so I was looking for a company that I could use as the foundation for that. And so acquired Infolinks, which was a remarkably interesting company at the time that was the right product at the wrong time. And sort of, I believed it could be evolved into be the right product at the right time. And so that's sort of a long, beleaguered way of sort of describing the start off, which is, Infolinks has always been an ad marketplace, a supply ad marketplace that was doing, and probably one of the first innovators of contextual advertising. The idea of putting infolinks, right, these links to keywords on a web page, where, for example, if you're reading the page and you saw a number of words that were relevant to advertisers, like the word mortgage maybe, or the word insurance, you could highlight those words, roll over them, bring up an advertiser bubble, and you could click through to the advertiser. It would provide sort of infolinks, intentful advertising based on contextual advertising. And that was really, really successful for a period of time. But then as programmatic grew and raged and behavioral advertising based on cookie targeting and all this, sort of grew up, it became a lot less interesting to advertisers who just really wanted simple onboarding ways to programmatically advertise. So inquiring in Infolinks, what I really loved about the company was it was direct to publisher, integrating directly to publisher, creating these ad units, these ad experiences, these sort of proprietary units. And I wanted to expand that and add more classic IAB units, but I wanted to do that leveraging both the contextual engine, and I wanted to do that solving something that I had seen being on the demand side for many, many years, which is a vast majority of the inventory in the open web is Very, very challenging to be kind, to be very challenging to find success and performance on. There's so much inventory. It is truly like the metaphor of finding a needle in a haystack when you're trying to find success. And as a buyer, that was just very, very painful. But what we did discover as a buyer over many years of doing that was, you know, 80% of the performance always came from 20% of the ad units, the ad placements on a publisher. And the rest of the ad placements were helpful, but they were not a driver of performance. Whatever performance you were looking for, whether it was viewability, conversion rates, or whatever, or ROAS, it always was these 20% of the units. And so what I found myself doing on the demand side for many years was just going direct to publishers, trying to work an arrangement with them to buy those specific units. And that sort of bore out for me Infolinks, which is if we could put those units and control those units on scaled publisher relationships, then we could address the 80%, right, of the performance. And so we set out working directly with publishers, one by one by one by one, which has been frankly a Herculean effort. Um, as you can imagine, each relationship is unique. Each integration methodology is different, right? The expectations are all different. So there's no way around it, but it's a customized, opportunity. And so we've gone one by one with thousands of publishers at this point and put our unique proprietary ad placement on publishers. And this has allowed us to create sort of a universal auction to our advertisers of the core 80%, right, of performance. And as you probably know, Kevin, over the years, as going up through the 2000s, it was all about how big you were, right? How many impressions you had, how many publishers you had, how many millions, trillions of requests you sent. Everybody was bragging on their website, right? It was almost like McDonald's signs, right? Trillions served. And that was sort of the defining moment of how did you have sort of critical mass and were you important as whether it be an SSP or an ad network or an advertiser? And I wanted to take a different approach. I wanted to take the boutique, it's not about massive scale, it's about massive quality and performance. And so the current trending word for this concept is curation, right? Ultimately, we've curated a supply pool that we're controlling, that we're working with, and that we're making accessible to our advertisers. And that curation pool is built around these placements that are super high performing. And the bad news about that is there's a certain amount of scale if you just want performance, right? You can't have trillions served. It's the reality. It's like an amazing restaurant or the farmer's market or the Whole Foods versus the Costco grocery store. Ultimately you're not massive, but wow, are you good? And so that's kind of the approach we've taken. And now I'm 6 years in with the business, and Infolinks is sort of reached enough scale where we are really putting a lot of effort, and which is a lot of reasons we're coming out and talking about it more, of going direct to the relationships on the advertiser, agency, DSP side, and exposing, revealing that we're there and what we're doing, and that we should bring direct relationships. So much like Jounce or Chris Kane has sort of evangelized the concept of right coming closer, right, one to one, right, and that through SPO, we're sort of DSOing, going direct to demand as much as possible.
Well, that's a great overview. Part of why I was excited to chat with you is having started in search engine marketing in SEO in 1994 and starting did it in 1996 and being really early in paid search is, search has really high intent.
Right.
Now, it doesn't uniformly always have high intent, but on average, it tends to have really high intent. And part of what I like about context and a good context matching engine to ads is the fact that it can often extract that intent and take advantage of it and really delight the consumer, right? More so than poorly targeted ads. I mean, I think nobody wins when it's a poorly targeted ad, right? The publisher doesn't
100%.
win, the consumer doesn't win, and the brand doesn't win. So it's super exciting to hear that you're continuing, down that adventure of like search, which is also limited scale for a particular corpus of keywords. You will end up reaching diminishing marginal returns, right? The same thing
100%.
holds true of high quality contextually targeted ads, right? So you can obviously go out and source more publishers who have the right content that's getting the right traffic.
Right.
But
And,
one of the
and just a
things that,
small example to that, right,
yeah,
is what one of the things that's unique to us is we can understand the referral to the site. We know when someone comes to that page from Google. That is a whole different level of intent when they do a Google search or Bing search and come to the page than if they came to the page accidentally through maybe a social click or some other means. And so those little differentiators allow you to truly target both context, right? Intent, why they're arriving, and a bunch of things you mix in to really understand, is this a really valuable impression or not?
yeah.
You know?
And right along with that is that helps you manage authenticity, right, with regards to reducing any kind of invalid traffic, or knowing what the referrer looks like, and having the direct publisher integrations just gives you greater transparency into that. And that's a
Right.
topic that just doesn't seem to go away, is the idea
Listen,
of IVT and
yeah,
fraudulent impressions.
it's really remarkable. You know, when I was on the demand side heavily in the previous company buying, you spent an awful lot of time dwelling on whether or not you were buying fraudulent traffic or whether you were buying, even if you didn't know it was fraudulent, was it ineffective, right? What was it, its behavior almost as if it was irrelevant traffic. And sometimes it's hard to class something as IVT, right? But even if it's IVT or not IVT, if it has no effectiveness, what does it matter? And
Right.
so, right? So one of the unique things in the Infolinks experience now, where we've only been direct to publisher, we've only been integrating our way. We don't, for example, we use JS tags and code to the site. We don't use header bidding. We don't use conventional methodologies. And this has allowed this conversation, at least for us, to not worry almost ever about IVT. We've never had any mass or concern about IVT because you sort of strip away all the things that enable it, right? When you're direct with the publisher and you're not hopping multiple levels, it's a huge advantage, right? To actually getting authentic traffic and authentic users. And then when you're integrating in such a way where you can minimize all the spoofing and sort of things that happen, right? The black arts, things that happen, then you don't worry about it so much. So it's not that it doesn't ever happen, but it used to be like top of mind for us all the time, and now it's not even on the radar most of the time.
Yeah, I had to sort of laugh because obviously the industry has come up with a lot of um, band-aids with varying levels of effectiveness, like ads.txt, right? But your direct publisher integration leaves no ambiguity as to both who the publisher is as well as what the URL is, and potentially the HTTP referrer or something of equivalent value, right? That allows you to, you
Small
know,
example of that is if your bounce rate is 1 second, that's something we can see. If a ton of traffic come in and has a bounce rate, that's really, really abnormally fast,
mhm,
that's suspicious. You know that there's something wrong, right? It's like common sense. And so, it's easy to say, you know what, we're just going to block that and we're just not going to enable advertisers to it. And
right.
so, it's hard to have those kind of opportunities when you're so far back, right, as the buyer in a
Mhm.
DSP or an SSP, and you don't really have access.
So one other thing that has been in the news, obviously, for the last couple of years, has been sort of the third party cookie, and its value to publishers, its value to advertisers. It's whether or not it's adding value to the consumer. I sort of felt like it was. Maybe the level of transparency wasn't always there with regards to whether or not information was being used with or without consent. But again, relevant ads are the most valued by the consumer, right? So, in this ecosystem where you have a tremendous amount of signal from the page itself, do
Mhm.
you find that there's still value to augmenting that signal with what's left of third-party cookies, or what's left of other signal data that you can potentially use to, for the targeting engine to do an even better job of putting the right ad in the right place for the right
Sure.
consumer?
It's a lot of interesting answers to that question. So on the surface, I'm a little bit controversial in that I really think the cookie has been picked on. And I think it is just sort of this anonymous little identifier that exists in the world, and everyone sort of applied their self-interested, both economic and political challenges to the cookie and treated it sort of like if we eliminate it, it's a salvation of many things. And I think, frankly, that's a misunderstanding of the reality. It's just this little anonymous identifier, and it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. But I don't think personally that the cookie is really at fault. I think the cookie offers essentially a protocol of plumbing that the whole architecture has been built around, and that we should embrace the cookie while embracing more improved, right, mechanisms. And so I think the cookie is probably got what, 30, 40, maybe 50% utility at this point, depending on the source. And that's fine. And there's a whole plumbing system the size of the Roman aqueduct system built around it, and nobody knows how to deconstruct it, right? And
Yeah.
then aside from that, I think we have this concept of contextual, which we embrace. And to be really honest, it also, and you, of course, this is your entire background, it has utility in certain places, but not in many other places, right? There's places where contextual is brilliant and it is effective and it drives a lot of return and it's just logical. And then there's other areas where, there's just very modest amount of contextualization for people who want to buy bars of soap. There's just,
Mm.
there's limitations, right? I mean, let's be honest, there's limitations. And
Right.
so beyond that, I think that we really are entering the next phase of using these obviously, and you know this better than I do, but these incredible AI tools to try to blend together mixtures of identity and contextualization and cookie learnings with third-party data to try to understand intent and purpose of the user. And that, frankly, I think that's evolving into something we don't fully understand yet. I think we're on a multi-chapter book of change, and we're going to find where kind of it lands. But ultimately, with specifically with Infolinks, it's leveraged context from its birth, and we've read the page, read the text on the page, tried to understand the semantics of the user. Maybe this user has got a tremendous amount of interest on how you get a mortgage, or maybe they have a tremendous amount of interest on how you solve a particular problem. And tying related ads to that is just logical. And then separate from that, it's very hard to glean what is the intent of the user. You kind of need to understand where have they been. For example, we know when a user arrives at a page and they started on a Google search. We don't know exactly what they searched for, but we know when they landed on a page, they started at a Google search and they landed on a page about mortgages. It's probably good and understandable to assume the context here is that they're interested in about mortgages, right? And this is why they land. So you can make some logical connectivities with context, semantics, cookies, leveraging cookie history, and so on and so forth. I think this is all really evolving. And I think ultimately, we're going to land in a place none of us have really, frankly, understood yet. The conversation today, I feel like it's going to be completely different once we understand how AI affects a lot of these inputs.
For sure. One other topic that seems to still be top of mind for a lot of buyers, and I don't always necessarily agree with their hypersensitivity around it, but it's the concept of brand safety,
Mhm.
right? I was never quite as sold into the brand safety concept as many of the vendors who were sort of hawking their wares about protecting brand safety because, with the exception of obviously certain sites where there was a
Sure.
neighborhood you didn't want to be seen in, the idea was, in my perspective, well, if it was the right person and the right message, you know, uh, there's got to be a little bit of wiggle room in the area of brand safety. But certainly, because you guys have full view into the context, I would imagine that that's often a selling point for your team in that you sort of mitigate
Sure.
that risk at the same time. But I'd love
Sure.
to get your point of view since you have you mentioned that perhaps you have a different viewpoint on cookies. I'd be curious to what your thoughts are on brand safety, particularly as it relates to when you're a news publisher and your yields are negatively impacted as a result of perhaps oversensitive brand safety filters and the extent to which maybe context can come in and rescue yield for a publisher that might
Right.
otherwise be having challenges with certain parts of their sites.
I have an incredible amount of empathy for the news industry from an advertising perspective. There's no doubt that the brand safety firewalls, you could probably fairly call them that, um, are doing as much as they can, right, to protect the advertiser from being associated with something really negative or, moderately disinformation oriented, right? And you can appreciate that an advertiser doesn't want to be associated to negativity. They don't want to be associated with something that probably is bordering on radical or untruthful and so on. So you can understand the intent on behalf of the advertiser looking for sort of a shield, right? A protection. But there's also no doubt we see way over indexing on blockage for news and information. So it's so far gone at this point that I think that the judgment sort of put onto digital news or digital information in terms of brand safety versus what I see in all other forms of media is night and day. And so maybe that's because the information is available, maybe because there's a financial self-interest to do so. It's hard to entirely unpack it, but it's without a doubt news has particularly been over indexed on right being blocked. And so, from my perspective, that's something that needs a lot more refinement. And that refinement is something that you see happening in small increments, but the broad category of information and news is really taking it on the chin, really, really taking it on the chin. And so, from our perspective, when we work with news publishers or information publishers, and they have content that, may have a keyword, it may just have a keyword that's potentially brand unsafe, whatever that keyword might be, you see a whole massive swath of advertisers blocked from that and the yield really decline. And so that starts to editorially influence, right? The publishers, the supply, and so on and so forth. And you start to see movements in that direction. From my vantage point, the contextual nature is a wonderful thing because you have more refinement contextually. You understand better what is the nuance. You can read the code and the words on the page, and you can understand that this isn't just a one particular topic that's banned, should just be banned, blocked from everything, right? There's a lot of nuance here, and you can refine that nuance. But I think the broader mass tech systems today that choose to block content for advertisers are really large whack-a-mole hammers. And they're taking the whole news category. What seems to me in the last year or two, maybe three, is moving them from a opt-out to now an opt-in kind of methodology. And that's been a shift that's been happening, but that's a very difficult shift, which is we don't trust you to begin with, right? And only upon analysis will we opt you in, as opposed to we trust you and occasionally we're going to opt you out. And
Right.
that's a shift we've witnessed for a little while now. I think probably leading up to the election, right? And it's unfortunate because a large category news has been deeply affected by it.
So I'd love to switch gears and talk about sort of level of ad intrusiveness in relationship to the relevance of the ad, right? So obviously, intrusive ads are probably more likely to get noticed and maybe more likely to get clicked on.
Sure.
Not that necessarily the click-through rate on an ad is the right KPI to use,
Mhm.
but at the same time, the advertiser wants to make sure that their ad is noticed, and that it actually provides some kind of a positive KPI. right?
Right.
So how should the agencies and the brands think about, that balance from the perspective of, not just the IB ad units, but potentially if it's a big enough relationship, custom ad units and page takeovers and interstitials and stuff that really, do provide a much higher level of intrusiveness. Is that sort of warranted if you can feel confident that the ad is relevant, or is there sort of a balance that one needs to find?
So your question is a really interesting question because it's a blend of both content and economics. And so you have this dilemma that publishers have been facing for as long as I can remember, which is economically, they've always been struggling. You sort of don't remember a time when you could say there's a really wealthy publisher killing it, and we're all envious, right? I mean, do you ever remember a period of time where you just were so envious of the publisher side as being rich? And so it's never been the case, right? And so, I mean, you might have one or
with,
two or
with
three
the
here and
exception
there.
of UGC publishers, which are really called social media networks
Right.
now, right?
Right. That's fair, right? But maybe you could be honest about it and say that's because the scale is mind-numbing, right?
Right.
It's just mind-numbing scale some of the social networks have. So from a web publisher perspective, I mean the web is I mean I started in the digital space in 1995 and started monetizing web publishers all the way back to 95. It's matured, right? This is now a couple almost 3 decades going. It's a mature space, and for the most part I feel like web publishing has become very, very commoditized in that maturity. And a part of that, process is the economics to the publisher has always been thin. It's always been a struggle for the publisher. They're always trying to out innovate some methodology in order for them to win more of the ad dollars. Okay. And in lieu of being able to achieve that, one of the easy go-tos is let me put ad density and quantity to overcome the problem, right? And that creates an interesting loop, which is the performance, the yield value for an advertiser when you add more frequency and recency, of course, declines. And so the advertisers can afford to pay less or want to pay less the more density of ads there are. And so you have this weird economic exchange that's been going on since I can remember back in the late 90s of publishers need to earn more, so they add more ads. As they add more ads, the yield value of that declines and the advertisers pay less. And that just the circle keeps going around and they just kind of float based on the current economic conditions for advertisers, right? And I can think back in multiple cycles of this. And so I'm bringing it back to, ad density and relevance, obviously are old advertising concepts, right? The more relevant, the more value. But then if you have more frequency and you have more recency, it declines that value. So where's the perfect balance? And I think one of and you hear it all the time, whether you hear it from, luminaries in our industry, you hear it all the time, like we're trying to clean up the ad space, right? I mean, since I can remember the mid 90s, we're trying to clean up the ad space, right? The reality is the ad space is sort of a reflection of the economic push and pull going on between, understandably, the advertiser trying to generate maximum value and the publisher trying to generate maximum value, and they're always kind of balancing between these two economic interests. And one of the things that I think we're moving into a period now where is less ad density, more quality, more relevance, more performance is the era we're into. And some publishers are not there yet. Some publishers are already there, and some have embraced it heavily. And I think that, advertisers right now are looking for that performance because they have a lot of options. They have a lot of options, between the walled gardens, and there are many now, right? The open web has got a lot of competition. So I think ultimately, what we see as Infolinks anyway is we are going to publishers working with very specific high performance unit that we like to place on publishers because we think the future, and that's why I got and acquired the company 6 years ago, was I think the future is about less ad density, more hyper quality, right? Less volume, less Costco, right? And more boutique. And I think that's the only way we compete against these other walled gardens, whatever they are, that are really working hard using technology and density to create high performance response.
Yeah, I agree because the interesting byproduct of excessive ad density is actually negative SEO implications, right?
100%.
And I've lived and breathed SEO since before Google,
Right?
and I think a lot of publishers they don't really understand that byproduct and have been hit on the wrong side of Google algorithm updates in particular, but Bing as well,
Sure.
because Bing and Google have an interest in protecting the consumer, right? And so they're
Right?
they're starting to negatively score pages and publishers, not at both the publisher level and the page level,
Right.
where it's a poor user experience, and so
Right. And
it's
so
it's a
much
good
of
place to
this,
be
it
now
is.
within this less is more mentality.
That's a great way of putting it. We're in an era of less is more. And that's hard for the publisher because yield management by its very nature, right, which is what programmatic is ultimately unleashed, is yield management. If you rewind the tape and go all the way back to the right media system that launched, right, which was one of the very first ad servers to do, the system was called yield management for publishers and advertisers. And the reason that yield management is what's happened all over these couple of decades to our industry is the advertiser wants to pay as little as they can, and the publisher wants to earn as much as they can. And it's a logical economic exchange. But if you put too many ads on the page and you make them do things that, are not valuable, like not be seen, you know, eventually there are consequences to the value, to the yield. And then the dance goes on and on. So I think it's an interesting, the competitors, the true competitors, and it's not talked about very much, but the true competitors like Facebook and maybe nowadays you could say TikTok and others, they have the blessing, and it is a blessing, of so many users in a captive environment that they can really control ad density and ad experience at a level where they can still make a good economic model. For a publisher that relies on so desperately, a web publisher that relies on Google sending traffic or so on, it's very difficult. I mean, think about that, right? You're a web publisher trying to get as many visitors to see you in like this sort of yellow pages, white pages world of options. So many web publishers, it's so hard. And you've got someone, like Facebook with, 4 billion users. And you have the opportunity to reduce frequency and recency and, get it just right.
Absolutely. So, what has you excited about the next year, or what else should we have been talking about that we haven't covered today with regards to the evolution of the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think so. I think the web world, which is where we mainly play for Infolinks, is become one of many, and so I think, the web world is one large garden to many of the different walled gardens, whether that be social or search or so on. And I think in the web world, I think we're now in the mode where it is contracting to its most valuable place. We're sort of going through this process, in my opinion, of entropy, right? Where we're going through the cycles to come to be the most healthy and most valuable form for advertisers. And it's a bit of a painful shifting and shaping to get there because we were the main kid on the block for a long time, right? And now we're one of many meaningful, folks on the block, right? But we're not the only show in town. And so the value of that inventory, I think, is undergoing a massive push and pull of the titans to create the highest quality possible so that it can truly compete with all of the other players, right? The scaled players, whether it be search or social and so on. And so I think what has me excited is we're kind of going through this maturity phase. I think particularly for us, Infolinks is in a really good place because we've never looked for quantity. We've been really hyper focused on quality, creating these very curated, nuanced ad positions and units that we control and having direct relationships with advertisers so that it almost creates a boutique, entity, right? Where we can create our own little garden. And I think kind of what happens now over the next couple, 3 years is we go through this curation story where the web kind of finds itself finally, where like where's its place, you know? And there's going to be some carnage in it. There will be some carnage for sure. And I think that there will be a bunch of folks that sit in the middle that won't have a place, right? That they had a place before, but they don't have a place tomorrow. And the demand and the supply, I think, will finally find a place where it coexists well together. And it's not like a roundabout in England where no one's quite sure how to get on and no one's quite sure how to get off, right? And everybody kind of knows how it flows and it works. So I feel actually very optimistic about the future. I think the web is one of many really important places, but I think that it's going to have a really important place amongst the walled gardens and outside of that. And performance for advertisers, however they define that, I think is only going to improve going forward. I really do. I think that we've, we're 30 years old, right? We've come out of adolescence, we're maturing, we're coming into our own as an adult, and we're like, who am I? And I think we're figuring out who we actually are and who we want to be and what our place is. And I actually think we're growing up to be a really good citizen in all of this now. So I'm optimistic about the future, both for Infolinks and for the space. And I think there's a lot of ripples to overcome, but I think we're in a really good place.
Great. Thanks, Bob, for sharing your wisdom and pontificating on the future of web media in particular. Pleasure having you on.
You're welcome. Everyone loves good pontification.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.